Hi. My friends, come on, say it, my friends. I don't even know what that means. Hi, Akash.
Hello, hi.
I like your headphones.
Thank you. I was behaving myself from the last time.
Oh, good. You got it. Is the sound okay?
That's what I wanted to make sure it is. But, oh, one second, sir. I plugged it into the converter, but I didn't plug it into the micro USB. One second.
In the last few interviews, including my own, I have my teenage children to teach me how to hook it all
Yeah.
up.
Okay, this should be better, right?
My guest today is Akash Sethi, the CEO of Quest Alliance. Akash comes from a family dedicated to the development sector. His past experiences in the private sector working in companies like Microsoft reflects in the manner that he's built this organization, leveraging technology to improve the quality of education and to empower youth to navigate the future of work. Thank you, Akash, for being our guest today in No Cost Extension. I really appreciate your time. To begin with, I guess, just for the listeners, how long have we known each other?
I think maybe 10 years, close to 10 years, 2011, 12, maybe that time, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. I think we maybe got to know you when we were doing a report on livelihoods, I believe. And no, the reason I just bring it up is because I think we've known each other for a while. I think when I first got to know you, and this is clearly my own ignorance, but I had no idea about your father, about your family. And I thought maybe it would be good to start off honestly with your childhood. And maybe if we can talk a little bit about how, I guess, the development sector was very much part of your upbringing, and really just give people a sense of what that was in your own household, since I think it was definitely very different than the household I grew up in.
Sure, yeah, I guess I can start with that because that's probably the foundation of a lot of what I do. So I grew up in Ahmedabad in the 1980s, and I think my very early age, my recollection of family holidays was going to smaller remote areas in Gujarat on World Women's Day or World Environment Day, because a lot of my early experiences were to actually go along with my dad, who is Gagan Sethi, who is a human rights activist and was doing a lot of work in incubating community-based organizations back then in terms of getting them finding local leaders who are from the community and working with them to identify challenges in the communities, and also a lot of activists in that community to be able to bring them together, to be able to help them identify the rights that they have and be able to respond to some of the local issues. My mother and father actually were both classmates in social work school. So mom got the gold medal, dad didn't. She went on to work in government with the labor department, while my father joined St. Xavier's Social Service Society, which was started by the priests to get young people involved in development work. I think that was the starting point. And I think as my dad started the work that he did, he started really inspiring or encouraging a lot of my family members to kind of come in and work with him. So we have an architect in the family who runs Hunar Shala Foundation, which is a low-cost housing model started in Kutch. Sushma Iyengar, who started Kutch Mahila Vikas Sangathan, then later Kutch Nav Nirman Abhiyan, and then a crafts and livelihood organization, Khamir. So she was involved quite a bit in starting the women's movement in Kutch. My Bua, who's my dad's sister, who started Drishti Media, a communication organization doing a lot of did a lot of work on film, basically using video and the power of video at that time to document a lot of stories of movements in the field. And my mother actually co-founded that organization. My uncle, who's a world billiards champion, who runs Olympic Gold Quest, which is a foundation that supports sports people, athletes who have the potential to win Olympic golds, to provide them with the last mile support. His wife, who runs Riverside School, which is a landmark school in terms of redefining education, student-centered or child-centered education. And my sister, who runs a museum on conflict, where she looks at exploring new narratives on how to think about conflict, how to think about museums in today's time, which are not permanent fixtures, but more interactive spaces. And am I missing someone?
No, thank you. And I appreciate that, because I think you just demonstrated how you come from an NGO family, if there is even such a term for that. I guess when you think about that, and like you were saying, when you were younger and you were attending the Women Day celebrations, what year was this around?
I think the first memory I have would be around 86, 87, maybe when I was 6 or 7 years old.
Got it. And so this was part of parcel of your life. I mean, this is what life was in your mind, at least. And so I guess, and I ask this, I think, because we also, as you know, Neer and I are, I guess, maybe a family NGO as well, since we worked together and we started Thusser together. My older brother also works in the development sector. When you were growing up, I guess, was this something that you felt was a place that you wanted to be part of, or was this something that you actually were like, I'm going to do something very different? This is questions I think that is asked upon us and our own children, and how do we expose them? How do we not expose them? And so I guess when growing up, what was your attitude, I guess, towards the development sector? Was it to sort of follow in your parents' footsteps, or was it to actually do something completely different?
I was growing up, I think, quite cynical about the development sector. I saw the hard side of life that a lot of people in the sector at that time had to experience, whether it was, working 16, 18 hours a day, earning very basic income, putting your life at risk, going into the villages and, really showing dissent to people in positions of power. Some of my dad's friends were shot and killed in the process. That made me quite cynical about the choice of life that they had made, because I couldn't see return on investment of that in my lifetime. I also found it really hard to explain, in school what my parents do. So that made me cynical. I definitely did not want to do development work. Maybe came on later. I definitely wanted to get out of the development space. I wanted to actually be a chef. That was my aspiration, for to be like in sports management while I was in school and college. Those were the two things I was quite passionate about. And my mom, who is PhD from IIM Ahmedabad, could not, fathom the fact that her son would be making food or in some restaurant somewhere. So she was very clear that you got to go and study economics and statistics in St. Xavier's College. So that was just the choice she made for me, and I didn't have agency at that time on my own to actually fight for my rights at that stage, to stick to that path that I had identified for myself.
It's amazing that you were able to just talk about this casually, about people your father worked with being shot and killed. And I say this more because clearly the type of exposure you had within the development sector. Number one, it is a very different development sector today than I think it was, like you were saying. I also think, again, having worked with your father more closely in the last year, given COVID and what's happened with informal workers and just seeing, his work up front and close, I guess, with everything he has been doing in this community, there was clearly back then, and to a certain extent even now, I would say a roughness to the work that your father has taken upon himself. And I guess growing up clearly with sort of where India was growing up, so to speak, it was much easier, and I don't mean this sort of negatively, but it was much easier to say, okay, well, let's follow sort of the aspirations of middle class Indians versus necessarily the ethos that your parents, I guess, brought together. And I mean, I have deep respect for your dad. I mean, there's three people that I know of, and I know of, not even personally, but there's three people I know that even today in 2021 who will just light up a cigarette in the middle of a meeting. And I think it's Dave Chappelle, it's Sean Penn, and it's your father. I mean, these are the three people that I've been seen from afar and see that happen. But clearly, I mean, what he was doing and to a certain extent continues to do is very different. If that's okay with me saying that, then perhaps what Quest Alliance does. And so I guess what was, and was there, I guess, even an aha moment when you decided to come into this space? And what was sort of similar, and maybe now you can even think about it more rationally than maybe when you made these decisions 10, 15, 20 years ago. But what was sort of similar to where, I guess, of what your parents did and what's different as well? Because as you said, it is a very different space today.
Yeah, sure. I think as I entered college, I got the opportunity to actually join a youth organization, which is ISEC. And I think as an ISEC volunteer, I started actually being a facilitator and a guide to other young people to create experiences around social responsibility, around entrepreneurship, around cultural understanding. A lot of what we did at an early stage was to facilitate internship programs for young people from other countries to come in to India and experience Indian development sector and also contribute with the skills, not just in the development sector, but also in the corporate sector. But I think learning to be a youth facilitator was a very, very empowering experience to be able to connect with like-minded young people of the same age, to be able to play a different role. I think that's what got me really charged up about working with young people, working with youth. I failed my ninth standard in school, and I think that was another key experience, which actually made me experience a certain amount of vulnerability, I think, that comes with being labeled a failure at an early age and then having to, work with those emotions in school. The reason I'm saying that is because I think everyone experiences some kind of marginalization or some kind of an experience that really hits you hard. Cool. But coming back to, I guess, the question on how is it that what I do is different. Pretty soon when I was leaving college, I spent a month in Johannesburg around the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002. And I spent a month learning about where the global development discourse is going with respect to multi-stakeholder partnerships, the increasing role of corporates in contributing to the development puzzle or solving the development puzzle. I also spent at the same time a month teaching young people in Soweto on the new technology skills, the digital literacy that was new then and is still kind of quite relevant. I think that experience of realizing that, there are more people or more young people who need to be involved and be the bridge between the ones who are more powerful with all the money and the resources, and also connect with young people and bridge that gap. One of the things that I think we do at Quest is to really engage with the corporate sector with CSR and really look at how to proactively engage with companies in helping them design CSR programs which align to the needs of young people. So if you're a technology company thinking about the future of work, you're thinking about the future of learning, we help design programs or program ideas that would help companies meaningfully contribute through their financial resources, through their expertise in technology, to how young people can learn and grow in the future. So we try to be the bridge between sort of corporate vision of a future world which needs 21st century skills with young people's aspirations is one of the things. And I think the other is really to work with NGOs who are really thinking about the role and relevance that they have in the changing landscape of civil society, where, from a rights-based approach that a lot of organizations have taken, to also balancing that with connecting with youth in their communities and providing livelihood pathways. While we've seen a lot of organizations use young people as community workers and as community activists, we've also realized that their career paths may not, you can't stay a volunteer all your life, and you need to be able to train facilitators that you employ to also be employable.
And you touched upon rights-based work. And I say that just because many of our listeners may not actually understand what does that mean. And so maybe if you can give us a sense of what is rights-based work, what does that typically entail? Clearly your father and a whole host of organizations, I guess, spend quite a bit of time on that.
And I'm not the best person to do that, because if any one of them hear me, then they might just disown me for that, for explaining this.
That's why I'm asking, is to get you in trouble. Gosh. And I hear you typing, so you better not be looking this up in Google. Don't cheat, Akash.
No, I'm not cheating. I'm just looking up, the latest.
No, in your honestly, in your own language, and I say that because that would be what is the difference? Is there? Yeah, just what is it? I guess.
Yeah, I think 1 second. I was just looking at a couple of charters, but maybe I should stop with the technical search.
Yes.
I guess there are two aspects, as I understand this. One is that there is the whole, Constitution of India, and being aware of the key aspects of the Constitution of India around fraternity, around harmony, around justice. And using the Constitution as a lens to understand who I am and how do I make meaning of the world. I think the other is to be able to look at the political narrative, that what are some of the political narratives that are there at a local level, at a state level, at a national level, and to be able to then really understand if you are able to respond and engage with power, sometimes showing dissent towards some of the decisions that they are making which are not constitutional, or being able to just represent the voice of the ones that who are the most vulnerable and marginalized in front of the ones who are in power.
Thank you. And the reason I think it's good just to get your thoughts on this is because I also know from our work with Quest Alliance, from Daswa's work with Quest Alliance, that many of the partner organizations that Quest works with are more local, are more community-based, and may also support these individuals with their rights, because sometimes those rights are not being met and they're not treated, I guess, in that manner that, again, people like yourself or myself are treated. And so if you can talk about, I guess, a little bit around how how have you been able to kind of straddle both sides? And I say this because, at least in the nonprofit sector globally and India, there's a huge, at times, heated debates on, are you rights based or are you sort of service delivery? And both again have its place, and both also have stakeholders who then criticize the other one fully, saying, well, why can you do that? And this is not empowering. Again, and I think you talked about power. And again, that's something we hope to talk about even in these conversations with no cost extension, is around power and what does that mean. And so how have you sort of straddled, I guess, both sides, and what have been some of the challenges for you to make this happen?
Sure. I think that's been quite a struggle, to be honest, to be able to balance the two. And I think the frame that I've kind of made peace with or apply is that there is this kind of balance between rights and duties. So if I look at it from a young person's perspective, that the right of a young person is to be able to get the right to make their own decisions, and the duty there that a young person has is the duty to take more leadership in making their own decision and not wait for that to happen by chance. Similarly, the idea of they have the right to enabling and safe spaces to discover themselves, to realize their own goals through some kind of social action. They have the duty to be promoting the constitutional values of fraternity, of social harmony, by proactively engaging in diverse relationships, and recognizing kind of the intersectionalities that they have to live with in terms of identity, gender diversity. So in a sense, kind of this balance of rights and duties is, I think, the combination that you are that we are trying to promote through some of the work we do as well.
I mean, I think you've answered it, which is, how do you grapple both sides? Because there is, again, in the development sector at least, conversations about, can one do both? And I guess even in describing your work, which again is fantastic, and you work very closely with companies harnessing their experiences in technology and enabling those experiences to reach those who otherwise don't have access to this technology. But like you were saying, and I think then some people may assume there's a conflict in that. Who is your client? Who are you benefiting? And I guess, at least for me and with Dasra, I think this has been something that we definitely also grapple with. As you know, we work with NGOs as well as with givers. And I guess personally, at least in the last year, seeing, all the disparities just in your face, which were always there, unfortunately, but we never saw it in the same manner that I think we've been able to see, again, not just in India, but globally as well. I think it makes, I guess, me as an individual really question some of these decisions, and perhaps not be as balanced as you're saying you have been able to be. And there's no right or wrong or black or white, but have there been, I guess, greater questions that you or the organization has put upon themselves, given sort of, what we've seen of the more recent past?
I think oftentimes we get stuck in taking these sides also, right? In terms of, are you a rights-based organization or are you a service delivery organization? And I think the beauty is to be able to, look at both sides and put both of those sides into your core DNA. And I think that is something which has been a learning. I don't think we are there yet in terms of being able to balance the rights and duties approach. Funders, for example, may want you to be more service oriented and deliver outcomes on youth, in our case, youth being able to get jobs. At the same time, they are not putting constraints on us on the approach we use to say that they can get jobs as the outcome, but you can engage young people in social action, you can engage young people in whatever way that you want to be able to use to help get those jobs. So it's a little bit of balancing our perspective of the outcome that is required from funders with the approach that we feel we would need to use to bring in both sides.
And can you give a sense to the listeners what does Quest Alliance do? But I think if you could also talk about a few of the stories and have allowed you to either pivot or reinforce, I guess, some of the decisions.
So we've been around for, Quest Alliance have been around for about 15 years. I think the first 3 years we started as a USAID project where we had the mandate to demonstrate how technology-based interventions in both training facilitators and in training learners can help, provide better 21st century skills to young people who are either in school or who have dropped out of school. So our early stage focus was to demonstrate models that use technology to empower and train teachers, facilitators, to create more a proof of concept on how technology can help empower learners as well. We came as Quest also said that no, we don't want to just do that, but we want to be able to register this organization in India to be an Indian entity, because this grant we had got from USAID in Washington, D.C., and there was a US-based NGO involved, and they agreed to give us a 1-year no-cost extension, which means they allowed us to use the funding we had not spent for 1 additional year so that the organization can be incubated. So that 1 year of no-cost extension is actually the reason why Quest got registered. And maybe sometimes they have positive outcomes as well to actually use that money to organization to incubate the organization. I didn't answer your question. I will, but.
No, but there was one good point. I think that it would be good just to help people understand, because many people even just question, how do you start an organization? And so, sorry, I'm just asking a follow-up to what you just said. Were you based in India at the time, number one? And I guess number two, you maybe talking a little bit about how that all came about, because again, traditionally people think you need a legal entity, you'll need to have a track record, and especially somebody who's as established and at times bureaucratic as USAID. People always say only after you've been around for 15, 20, 30 years, you can get a grant from them, kind of thing. And so I guess, how did you sort of put this all together without even a legal entity? And how did you start, like, I guess, working with the community if you weren't even in the community?
Yeah, so I think the early years, basically, I was part of an international youth foundation, which was an organization based in Baltimore in DC, who had the mandate to work in 5 countries, which included India, and they were trying to find someone to help start their India operations. So I got in touch with them, and I was at a conference that they were running in Alexandria in Egypt at that time, working with Microsoft in Middle East and Africa. And that's where I learned about the idea that they had got to start some work in India. And so I actually happened to be at the right place at the right time, where I met the International Youth Foundation. They kind of hired me for the first 3 years to run this project. So the short answer is, I think it's easier to ride or piggyback on existing initiatives, in my view, to be able to learn from the mistakes of the organizations that are already doing work in the field, and then find ways, if there are any, to then maybe translate some of those project-based engagements into organizations.
At that time, I guess, statistics-wise, at least, Bihar had lower socioeconomic sort of development indicators than perhaps most of the countries globally. Help us understand what the conditions were where you I'm sure, were in the field. What was the situation, I guess, in the schools, in the communities, and how welcoming or unwelcoming were there to somebody who was used to be at Microsoft and then now has just come into this village to say, I'm going to help with XYZ?
Yeah, so I think early stage when we actually did our situational analysis back then, a big reason that came up was that parents don't trust the school. Parents think that nothing happens in school. People more or less waste time in school because they don't really see any change that their students have made in terms of learning levels. Teachers feel that parents are not doing their bit. Girls are taking care of their siblings or doing household work. They are expected in the harvesting season need to go to the fields for harvesting. So there is this blame game going on between teachers and parents, and the schools themselves are in a really bad conditions. They don't have any playgrounds. There are very few classrooms that are even having basic electricity. The midday meal is probably the only reason kids come to school, so that they can get food. So there is very little room to learn anything else, and there is no room for where learning happens, which is outside the classroom, whether that's through sports, through arts, or whatever the case may be. So I can't think of a story right now. It's probably just
No, that's
something
fine.
that's.
That's fine. Don't worry.
But the other thing I would probably wanted to say in this context, one of the set of work was around working with schools. The other work was also with respect to training teachers and facilitators, the 21st century skills that they need, and how technology plays a role in training teachers on 21st century skills. So oftentimes when we would visit a lot of the classrooms, teachers would be using personal stories that they have had and using those stories as triggers to talk about and inspire young people. The insight there was that teachers should be able to bring more of their experience to the classroom, and not just stay limited to say the course or the curriculum that needs to be taught, because that's when you can start building relationships that are more meaningful, when the teacher is more bringing their life into the life of the students. So I think technology not as a end in itself, but a means for personal reflection for a teacher, and then that personal reflection being used in the classroom as an important experience to build relationships with students.
And I think this is again something that many people just don't understand, right? And I guess so. For example, like you said, you work in many hard to reach areas which have not seen economic growth in the country. So Bihar, Jharkhand, and other states that are just not being served by the for-profit sector, and many times not effectively by the government either. For a variety of reasons, just very difficult places in all respects. How then I guess, does 21st century training and education reach areas where jobs may still be stuck in the 18th or 19th century? And I say this again because many of these areas, I'm assuming even now, are agriculture in nature, bullock carts. I mean, they're not 21st century in terms of what we assume, I guess. So how do these two come together, and do they even need to?
Yeah, that's a great question, I think. And the learning is that, let's say in a place like a Bihar or Northeast where local jobs don't exist, right? Or very few jobs, whether those jobs would be almost, for teachers or for the local para health workers, or like probably development sector is probably the biggest employer in some of these spaces. The reality is that they would need to migrate to be able to get that job. What we do, at least in some of these spaces, is really get young people to go out and do their own market scan, talk to local employers go and bring back data, present that data using Excel sheets or PowerPoint presentations back to their own community members, saying this is the reality of our local labor market. This is the kind, through internet search I can find out what are the jobs that I can go and do in the nearest town, whether that is a Patna in Bihar or it is a Rajkot in Gujarat. And I think that really helps in starting the negotiation between the youth and the parents and the community, who would then say, okay, these are the kind of jobs that are available. Then you are allowed to go out for a fixed period of time, say 6 months, as long as making sure that you can do that in groups. So then you need to arrange for hostel facilities or some kind of a safe housing. Boys have a problem with cooking only, or rather being used to food, or that their mom cooks and they need to learn to make their own food. So a lot of these kind of processes that are around negotiation and agency building are embedded in the program itself. So you're learning 21st century skills, you're using them to negotiate with your community members. That's one approach that has helped both people migrate from spaces that they are coming from, but also find local jobs as well. I think the other is being able to use in our secondary schools work. For example, we get young people to engage with local community problems, saying, okay, my mother faces problems in washing dishes, and can I envision a kind of a local dishwasher solution or an electric brush that she can use. So very local solutions that young people can imagine to solve problems in their communities using technology, where they become creators of new ideas and not limit themselves to then only consuming content.
I guess to a certain extent, in hearing you explain it, and maybe these are what's called 21st century skills, but I guess to a certain extent, it's also giving knowledge to these communities for them to then make decisions that maybe they don't have access to that knowledge already. So it seems kind of like you're just bringing, I guess, some of those practices, but leveraging technology far more effectively. You're kind of creating a movement, I guess, where technology, again, is just a tool, but not necessarily a technology driven job. And maybe that's where I've been confused this whole time. When I hear 21st century skills, I just assume that also relates to like being in a call center or something that happens in 21st century. And I guess in hearing you, that may not be the case, or am I just getting this completely wrong?
No, I think it's fair to say what is so 21st century about this. This is good education and good learning, right? That you need to build meaningful relationships, you need to solve problems, you need to be more self-aware, you need to learn to, make your own decisions. The difference I do feel is, one, in terms of the tools itself. You are learning to use new tools, and it's a medium to also build your confidence. You will need to be able to use data and data analytics more in most of the new jobs that are coming up. As a small entrepreneur or as a micro entrepreneur, you will need to use Amazon, Flipkart, and other platforms to be able to sell. So you will need to learn to have a bank account that is linked to a phone pay or a Google Pay to be able to receive money. So there are definitely areas that will need a greater technology fluency, not just literacy, to be able to access new and emerging opportunities that the market is going to throw up. The green economy is going to be waste management or solar technicians, and we will need to prepare young people to access these kinds of opportunities.
So Akash, one of the things we're trying to do in these conversations, and sorry, we've taken up a lot of your time, and I hope it's okay, is to have colleagues at Dasra to sort of ask their question. And so Yashi has a question. Go ahead, Yashi.
Hi, Akash. Thank you so much. I think I was just listening to the conversation. It was very, very insightful, and something on the lines of what you've been talking to Deval about regarding technology. I wanted to ask, what are some ways in which digital access can be made more inclusive for communities and young people, especially, post-COVID times, maybe?
So I think access is definitely the one of the biggest barriers in terms of access has been infrastructure. So computers in schools, there aren't enough computer labs in schools. There is no internet access in schools. If there is internet, then you don't have good quality content that is relevant, localized, etc. The issue of access, one of the things that we've learned is also with respect to mindsets that families have around accessing digital devices for learning. I often joke that oftentimes it's the ABCD. So it was astrology, Bollywood, cricket, and devotional. These are the four things family and also where content gets streamed the most. The E for education or employability, it's not looked at as a source for learning, especially during the pandemic. Some of that has shifted where families are now also being able to participate in classrooms because the classroom is actually reached their homes, although the device is still shared, right? You have one device shared between 4 people, 5 people in a family. And so one of the experiments we ran was actually starting mobile learning libraries, which means we had shared devices. We had a library of say 20 phones, 25 phones that was circulated as shared devices, which means one girl got to keep the phone for 20 days just to herself, and she got to use it to attend online classes. She got to use it to learn on mobile apps and also build the trust with the family, saying that there is learning and we could show evidence of that learning through some kind of a basic analytics that the app was giving. So that allowed then the family to say we'll invest 1,500 rupees, 2,000 rupees for the device purchase, and we were offering some kind of a recharge bonus. So if you would learn an X amount of lessons on our platform, we'll unlock a monthly internet charge for that phone number. So I think that was one experiment which worked well within the limitations of what we operate in. The issue is not money. That's the mindset shift that we also need to have as practitioners. It's about breaking mindsets of what is the device meant to do, whether there is safety is an issue, especially with internet. There is a huge angle of how safe are my interactions. So we need to also orient the families on what are the things that you need to do to make sure that the safety of your child is also maintained, and make some of the learning and growth visible on the device. That's what we are really after in terms of breaking. And the other is where there's a genuine issue with devices. What we have tried is also basic voice messages that are sent on phones, that are tips of how to use your home and your local surroundings to engage kids meaningfully, where the parents actually become the teachers and you're sending them messages. So that's another strategy, especially during COVID, that has worked.
When lockdown happened March 2020, what was some of the shifts? And maybe if you could talk a little bit about what was the Quest Alliance model? What was it pre-COVID? What were the shifts that you made in March 2020? And now that it's 2021, are there even more shifts that you have to make? So maybe if you can just tell us about where the program was being run, how children and youth were accessing your program pre-COVID, the last wave, the first wave, and then this last wave. I think that'll also be helpful for the listeners just to understand the differences in how children are accessing education in India.
So one thing that changed significantly was one, of course, for teachers, a lot of their class had to move online or had to move on phone-based setup. So teachers started demanding a lot more inputs on how to teach online, how to facilitate online, to design some kind of a digital learning class. So that demand, otherwise earlier teachers were quite resistant to saying why should we use technology to teach, what is in it for us. So that demand definitely we saw a huge increase in demand. The second is the students themselves have very limited access to digital devices, and I think we spoke a little bit about that. Given the limited access to digital devices, we saw a lot of students sharing devices. So when we would see that there are, say, 50 60 people online, there would actually be 4 times that number because there are 4 students sharing a device. So there was that angle where students coming together, working on the same device that we saw. We also saw a lot more engagement on our online learning platform. So just in Haryana alone, we saw around 45,000 students download our app and started learning and started completing. Typically, our completion rates would be around 45-50% of the total courses that are on our platform would see a completion. In the lockdown, we saw almost 80% completion rate on the platform. So there was definitely a high engagement that we were seeing from our pre-COVID days, and also increased enrollment on the platform from typically 30,000 students a year would be online, we would be engaged in our youth program, to almost 88,000 students in the year that we saw enroll. But we've also got a lot of distress calls from students saying we don't have enough, like this fear of missing out, we don't have enough data packs, we don't have, like I mentioned earlier, our parents are not allowing us to come online because they don't trust what is being taught. So there is that whole element that played out. But also I think students becoming creators of digital content, especially on issues of child rights, child marriage, students creating content and sending that out in the communities that they are part of. So definitely that shift from only being consumers of information and content to feeling like they can express their voice, they can express their opinion using technology on issues that concern them and sending it out. So a little bit of that push we've also seen in some of the work that we've done.
As of now, approximately 60% of the kids you feel have access to some sort of digital device, 40% do not. That 40% typically will be from perhaps economically poorer backgrounds. And so for 2 years, and like you said, whether it's excitement or something else, there's definitely a dip now that may continue this year in terms of even that 60% accessing education. And so is it safe to say between 40 to 60% of the kids and children and youth that you work with will actually have limited, if any, education for an entire 2-year period because of COVID wave 1, 2, and the multiple waves, unfortunately, that may come about?
Yeah, easily. I think it's fair to say that at least 40 to 50% of children will not have access to any form of learning opportunities that has a social angle to it, where people are learning together. They probably have access to some form of written text, print materials, books, sent by a few organizations to children's homes. So there would be some access to print material that we are hearing of, and that we've also been involved in. But from a digital perspective, definitely not more than 50-60% would have access.
Pre-COVID, I think there was a lot of emphasis that was starting to take place on learning outcomes. Kids were enrolled in school, they had a desire to learn. Quest Alliance did fabulous work in training teachers to be more excited and be more forthcoming with the community and the kids themselves. And so, like you were saying, some of the basics, reading, literacy, numeracy, these were areas that you and other organizations, across the country would sort of focus on. And of course, Pratham has the USSR test, which year on year was showing some, improvement, at least that was happening. Given this sort of 2-year hiatus, and as you just overlaid the psychosocial sort of support that kids will need just to be confident again, or even read again, or write again. Do you see this as sort of, in 2022 March or June, let's say 2022, when the new school year will open up in different states, that it'll just be a 2-year sort of pathway in terms of bringing people back to where they need to be? Or do you see this as actually a difference in the way we're even looking at long-term goals of education, to include sort of aspects that honestly perhaps were not been included as much pre-COVID?
One big emphasis, and this is something we talk about quite a bit on our work as well, is to do with self learning or self directed learning, and the importance of a learner deciding what they want to learn, the pace at which they want to learn something, how should they assess themselves and get feedback from peers, from self assessment that they do. So I think a lot of the importance on self directed learning, I think that's going to gain a lot of momentum, because it's going to mean that the responsibility and the choice of what needs to be learned would be much more, or will need to shift much more to the learner. And I think that mindset shift, which will be brought about because of these COVID years, will have a much longer lasting impact. More educational systems will think critically about as to, are we really promoting this mindset in our learners? These are also the skills that are relevant for the future from a work perspective, that what is more important than studying and passing exams are the skills of learning how to learn. And I think this pandemic will definitely accelerate that process and mindsets amongst some of the key decision makers, who would also have to think critically about, therefore, how do we assess if we really want to promote this kind of a shift in learning.
I guess, given clearly you've done a lot, Quest Alliance works across multiple states in the country. You focus on different age groups as well. Has there been, I guess, a time where somebody or something really challenged you?
I could even say from, say, back in 2009, 10, where we were developing digital solutions. The big challenge was most of our centers did not have internet. So we had to work with the constraint of no internet and design a solution at back in 2009-10, which was quite a significant shift that we made, saying that everything is internet based, to kind of a hybrid of an offline and online. I think working with government definitely has been a big challenge, but also a big pivotal moment, where, say, partnering with the Ministry of Skills and Entrepreneurship, where we are working on a model for training, or rather master trainers, who would then cascade the idea forward. I think companies, whether companies, will continue to invest in projects, or will come together to really invest in a larger goal and allow for, the organization to really pool resources from multiple sources rather than only say meet outcomes that are very project oriented. So I think one of the shifts that we've made is to build a network called the Future Right Skills Network, where we've gotten organizations like Accenture, Cisco, JP Morgan to invest in a collective goal of, say, getting ITIs ready for the future of work, and not take funding that is only based on project deliverables around the number of youth reached, but invest in a bigger platform. I think obviously, we lost a very important team member, so that's been quite challenging and pivotal in terms of losing Abhijit, and then having to reassess the values and what he stood for, and being able to then create space for more people to hold those values that an individual brought to the table. I think to be able to kind of deal with that loss and yet see it as a way for more leaders to emerge has been quite challenging, and probably it's going to be a pivotal moment in our evolution.
I think what we've seen with this last COVID wave is that all of us know people who have passed away because of this second wave. And many teachers have passed away, many parents have passed away, many colleagues have passed away. And so, again, we touched upon this with Abhijit, but there's so many people out there who've lost loved ones and colleagues and don't know how to go forward now, questioning a lot. And so if you can share a little bit about what you maybe individually, or as well as what Quest, I think, had done when one of your key leaders and partners in this passed away, all of a sudden, I think that'll just help some of the listeners just think about their own, I guess, coping mechanisms and how they can move forward.
Yeah, I think that's just a difficult one to bring. But I think maybe I can say from my personal experience of loss, I feel that talking about it and sharing the gaps that the loss has left has definitely helped me accept it, make it a part of life, and also to be able to ask for more help and support to other people when I have been feeling that void, because it could just be a conversation, it could be a moment where a lot of that comes back. And so not necessarily keeping it within or inside, but just being able to express that loss regularly has definitely given a lot of energy to just say what I am feeling with respect to that loss. Oftentimes when you lose someone who's close to you, or maybe when I lost someone who was close to me, I also try that extra hard to think about it from that person's perspective more than I would have when that person was actually around. And so I try to be that person more than I would have, because I know that that person is around, and so we can both play our role. So in a sense, I feel more maybe balanced as a human being, more because of the absence of someone who was close to me. And so it's helped me, I think, just be a better person and a more balanced person than I would otherwise have been in the presence of him. That loss gives me a certain amount of energy to bring a side of me that I knew existed but was buried somewhere or hidden somewhere. I try more to bring out the different sides of me, knowing that I am living also on his behalf.
Again, having lost someone close to us just a few weeks ago, there was a quote I read, which is something along the lines of, if you mention somebody's name or think about the work that they're doing, they're still there. And it's only when we stop mentioning their name or living their values or seeing the contribution, that's only actually when they pass away, which is, again, extremely difficult to do, especially for those of us who've lost, two parents or three loved ones, or, all of a sudden in a week or two. It's so hard to sort of, I guess, grapple with that loss and pain. It's up to us then to ensure that they live on through what we do is so important and critical. And I think that's clearly the impact that everyone has in the world. It's not just their physical impact, it's what they leave behind with us. And one of the aspects I know that Quest Alliance has been year after year been recognized for is being one of the greatest place to work in the NGO sector. And you have all done a fabulous job in terms of bringing individuals from different walks of life and enabling them to thrive. Can you give maybe a couple of examples, and you don't have to mention real names, but how you've enabled individuals who may not have the same exposures like you did at Microsoft, but still are taking on roles that, if it wasn't for Quest Alliance, they would not have that exposure. And how did you sort of support them in that journey? And so how have you dealt with this? And I think this is something that many NGOs grapple with, that, we may be able to get people from better schools than even what we attended. But then there's still many people, honestly, from the communities that we serve that may not have that exposure, but still have a deep desire and many times greater desire to uplift. And so how does Quest sort of balance with this? And what do you do as an organization to ensure that everyone actually has, this role to play, regardless of your background or educational credentials?
I think there are a few things that I can share. One is, as we've grown over the last, say, 10, 12 years, from, say, being 20, 30 people to now 230 people, that, journeys obviously becomes more and more difficult. But I think there have been a few things that we've done in terms of investing. One is people have a certain sense of belonging to the organization, which is, cultivated by creating spaces where they are part of key decision making, whether it's around the strategic plan, whether it is around developing policies that are going to impact them. There is a certain amount of investment in terms of learning pathways, whether it is in terms of building their facilitation skills, their leadership skills, to the extent that obviously they would question authority, power, and be also okay to hold conflict with senior leaders in the organization, which means that the senior leaders in the organization also have the mental models to work with those kind of disruptive conversations. Also be able to really create the space for also well-being for the individuals to feel like, the space cares for us and invests in our well-being, whether that is through having a dedicated counselor or whether it is through having people take a day off in a week, especially when times are tough, really investing in any learning opportunity that they feel is important for them to learn and grow. It's, I think, the role of, I think from a leadership perspective, the role of, how are we creating the vibe, which is, I'm naming it as the well-being, inclusion, belonging, and equity in people to really learn to sort of work with each other, but also invest in the sort of organizational growth.
I think you forgot your pizza oven, because I think that's a critical piece. So that's my last question. I mean, you started off saying that you were arguing, I guess, perhaps, and I'm saying arguing, maybe it wasn't an argument, but seeing you as a youth and telling your mom that I want to do something in sports or cooking, like you said. Maybe that argument you didn't win back then, but you do have a pizza oven. And how did that come about in your office, by the way? So how did that come about, and how are you still fulfilling your culinary goals?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's the point I forgot, is really food as a means to building culture and meaningful relationships. And I think food was one of the first things we invested in as we moved into our own office to get someone who can cook, and that led to quite a lot of deep relationships being built in office as well, because you were every day coming in and first going to the kitchen to ask what's for breakfast or what's for lunch or what's for evening snack. That I think over time grew into having more regular conversations or get-togethers on every first Friday. That's the time we started kind of collectively thinking about what could be good additions. So we built a pizza oven together in our office, which was a lot of fun to build, but also make regular monthly events where we cook together as a team.
And this vibe that you're saying, which is clearly palpable when we would come to the office and see everyone, how was that created in the new normal of Zoom, of all of us working from home and not seeing each other, not being next to your pizza oven, not having those? We used to have Friday lunches, as you know, and from the beginning, so for 20 years, every Friday, all of us would sit together. We would order food from outside, and that was the only time no meetings were allowed. We haven't, I'm sure, just like you all, we haven't been able to do that since March 2020. And so, how do you keep this vibe alive? Yeah, with the circumstances that we're in right now.
Yeah, we used to have lunch every day. So I think the first was, when people were just moving into their own spaces when the lockdown happened, and just to be able to do a virtual meeting where you could see people in their homes and really connect with them sitting in their homes was, I think, the starting point where, you were really in some ways letting your cameras down, but you could really look into people's various contexts, whether it is someone sitting in a rural Gujarat or in a rural Bihar or in a fancy home in Bangalore, which you could never do sitting in an office meeting or in a retreat. I think the second one was with respect to just the safety from a health perspective. So just bringing in all the health insurance, all the counseling and support service, so that everyone feels that the health part is covered for families as well. So there was, I think, a significant investment that was made in that. I think the third was just family days. So every month we do family days or first Fridays, which was now where families can join in, and there is some sort of a cultural program that's happening, or some kind of a magic show that's happening, where kids of our people can also come and see each other and experience something together, catering to the family as the unit versus the individual as the unit, and creating small spaces of learning together as families. Being a digital 21st century organization, we definitely had a lot of investments we had made in trainings, but not enough on digital learning. And I think this was the year where digital learning was a premium. We really allowed a lot of time and money going into upskilling and learning opportunities. So I feel that was another one. And somewhere we are also learning, I think, how do you assess performance in an online world? Should you assess performance given the emotional and the mental challenges that people are going through? And if you don't, then what would be the criteria for people to experience growth? Those are things we are struggling with right now fully, especially as people transition from managers to senior managers to leaders in the organization.
No, thank you. I think it's amazing again how you've been able to do this many things and keep the team motivated, keep yourself motivated, and still serve the community. Thank you, Akash. I think we were able to ask some questions about, COVID and where we see sort of education and children and youth going forward. So really, really appreciate your time on this. It's been great. And as always, thank you for the great work that you all do. I think it's amazing, and we continue to be inspired.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. And
thanks for listening. If you'd like to know more about Quest Alliance and support their phenomenal work, go to questalliance.net, or you can go to our website, dasra.org/NCE. Until next time, stay safe. No Cost Extension is produced by Vaca Media.